Why is everyone going on about tax rises? After all, we've just had the spending review, so why? Well, I'm going to take you through that. There's some reasons for it, but also along the way we're going to understand a bit more about what this spending review really decided. But before all of that, the key thing to remember here, and we'll keep coming back to this, the key thing to remember here is when you look at the government finances, the really important thing, okay, is that it has lots of money that it spends, 1.35 trillion pounds. It has quite a lot of money that it brings in taxes. We pay in taxes. Obviously, it's our money that gets spent as well. But that these bars need to match, okay? And so at the moment, you can see they're not at the same level. So you need a bit of extra borrowing. And that's basically where borrowing comes in. All that, those deficits we often talk about, that is the difference between that and that. And, you know, when you're talking about the spending side of things, which is what we've been talking about quite a lot recently, here's another quick thing to remember, okay? A lot of the spending that happens, that government's doing, is actually called annually managed expenditure, and it's on things like benefits, interest costs, pensions. That's not covered in the spending review, okay? Because it's seen as generally quite hard to control that on a year-to-year basis. So the main focus of what we've just had in the spending review is this departmental spending. It's less than half, as you can see, of the total amount that it spends. We'll come back to that in a second. But until we do, you can break that down. So the stuff we've just learned about in the spending review, break it down into two categories. You've got current, so day-to-day spending, things like salaries, just keeping running costs going. And then you've got investment, and that's where you build stuff, basically. And just taking investment first of all, you know, this is one of the most striking charts off the back of the spending review. This is showing you how much the government invests, so spending, on various different categories. So you've got investment in social things, like a lot of that's kind of the healthcare system. And then you've got investment in economic infrastructure, so things like road, R&D tax credits, things that actually theoretically get the economy going faster, and then defence. And what's really striking about the numbers that we've just had in the spending review is, look, that kind of dark blue, obviously defence has gone up, and most of the focus was on that because that was the biggest proportional increase. But actually, if you look at that, the economic investment from the government, that is at the highest sustained level on record. And in theory, that could bring about some extra growth. At least that's what the government will be hoping for. Okay, but that's only one part of this story, okay? Because you have to look back at the big picture. That was investment we were looking at just a second ago. Most of the spending is on this, so current spending, day-to-day spending. And when it comes to that, there is one big dominant feature here, okay? So that's just showing you the extent to which that overall spending increased between the start of the forecast horizon and the end. So that's the level we need to get to. And what we're going to do here is kind of break down which departments contributed to that level. And, well, you'll see there's one standout here. Just look at that. Health and social care accounted for nearly all of the entire increase in cash terms of the spending. It's basically health. I mean, there's a little bit of education, a little bit extra for defence, and then actually that takes you above that level. And for every other department, they had to see a fall in terms of their real terms spending. Okay, so that's how you get to that, and that's day-to-day spending. And the first reason why everyone is banging on about taxes, okay, is if you look deeper within this day-to-day spending category, you see something else, which is on local government spending. This is showing you the local government settlement. And this is kind of interesting here. Look, the amount of money being spent by local government is going up, okay? And that's the first bit of the spending review. And in that period, about 46% of that came from council tax. The rest, a lot of it came from central government. But here's what we just learned. So in the next part of the spending review, that is going higher. So everyone's like, great, okay, so more money for local government. However, the sting in the tail is 80+% of that comes from council tax, which is why the IFS and other people think that you're talking about the highest council tax levels, just as a result of what is imputed within these numbers, highest council tax levels that we've seen potentially for decades. So that's number one reason why everyone is banging on about taxes. But the other comes back to these charts, okay? So remember, these two bars have to be at the same level or else you get in big trouble. And here's the issue, okay? So if, by some chance, the economy is weaker, then that means, all else equal, that bar goes down because you get less tax receipts coming in because people are earning less, so that bar goes down. And sometimes actually that bar goes up because you're having to spend more on benefits. So the bars don't match, and that's a big problem. And, do we have a reason to suspect that might be the case? Well, if you look, for instance, at the latest growth numbers, now these are volatile, it's monthly numbers, but they do show the weakest growth since October 2023 in the latest month. And while I say that's volatile, if you look elsewhere, look at trade numbers, for instance, you're seeing trade numbers since those tariffs have been implemented. Exports to the US have gone down really sharply. And on top of that, the Office for Budget Responsibility, who do the official forecast for the government, which feed into these bars, by the way, the critical thing, their numbers are pretty optimistic. They're expecting pretty strong growth. And so let's imagine that you do indeed get weaker growth than they're expecting, which is kind of what most other economists think is likely. Then all else equal, you might see that bar going down. So weaker growth, weaker tax revenues, and that bar being lower as a result of that, which leaves you with this. Look at the difference between the two of them. That is, I guess, what a lot of economic journalists call a fiscal black hole, and that needs to be filled. And this is what gets us to the crux of the argument here. Okay, so there are a few ways you can fill that. Four ways, really. Four critical ways you could do that. Number one, you could raise the amount of borrowing, so you could borrow more, and that just makes that bigger, and you're making up the gap through extra borrowing. Option one. But here's the catch with option one. Right now, the amount of leeway the government has, the Chancellor has, against her own fiscal rules, which basically is here's how much you can borrow and here's the limit, the higher these bars are, the more the headroom against those rules. It's really low. So you see those two bars on the left-hand side. That is basically just how much this Chancellor has in leeway against her fiscal rules. It's much lower than previous Chancellors in the past. In other words, even against her rules, let alone against what markets think is kind of palatable, there's not much room left to borrow. So option one is possibly out. You've got option two. You could cut welfare and pensions, although that's tricky. And right now the pressure actually is on her to raise welfare with, two-child policy and so on. So that might not be very palatable either. Which brings us to option three, to cut departmental spending. But that is basically the thing that has just been set in stone by the spending review. So you see the issue. Everything points towards, I'm afraid, option four. And what is option four? It's back to here. It's raising taxes so that those two bars are equal to each other. But even here, again, there's another sting in the tail, which is that it's not altogether clear how much higher taxes could go in the UK. Because right now, this is the tax burden. So it's showing you the level of taxes as a percentage of GDP going all the way back to the 1940s. And the current government plans lift that up to the highest level that we've ever seen. And so that really is the issue. It's not altogether clear that any of those options are very good. But for the time being, everyone is going to be talking not just about spending, but also about taxes, because the pressures on the Chancellor are getting greater and greater.